Good afternoon, everyone. Kumar Dattatreyan here with Agile Meridian for our next episode of the XSCALE series, part of our Agile Shorts channel. And with me, of course, is my good buddy, Glenn Marshall. And I believe we're up to the E in XSCALE. Is that right, Glenn?
It is.
And what is the E?
The E is ecosystem thinking. And not only are we up to E, we're halfway through it.
Are we?
We did, our previous episode was on permaculture. We spoke in general about it, and now we're going to get into the specifics.
Excellent. Yes, I forgot about that. Yes, you are correct. So what are these 12 principles? And what we thought we'd do today is take each one of them. We're not going to go through all 12 today. We'll get through as many as we can in about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll continue it in the next episode. So just for the audience, Glenn, you want to take a stab at describing permaculture principles?
Put me on the spot here. I'm fascinated by the notion of an ecosystem and how things just work, and each of the different components don't need to go and coordinate with each other. They obviously interact with the thing that's beside them, but they don't have knowledge of the full thing, and it all just works, which is fascinating, and they're even resilient. So permaculture is an attempt to go and take those notions from a natural ecosystem and apply them to a human-controlled ecosystem. And this work has been distilled down into a series of principles, which we'll be getting to. But the notion here is that you can create a permanent human contrived ecosystem, roughly analogous to a natural ecosystem, but it will, of course, will produce food and so on and so forth. But it's permanent and it's an ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a great intro. I'm just going to read from the permaculture article. We'll include links to that in the show notes to this episode. So these principles, I'm going to just read this excerpt. Each principle can be thought of as a door into the labyrinth of systems thinking. Any example used to illustrate one principle will also embody others. So the principles are simply thinking tools to assist us in identifying, designing, and evolving design solutions. And I think this is really the heart of it. These principles are there to help us design ecosystems, again, in the natural world, how humans can design ecosystems that help us preserve and sustain the resources that we have, the land, the air, the water, and so on and so forth, and still produce a yield without degrading the systems that support the production of that yield, right? And so the first principle, ecosystem principle, is, I'm summarizing here, it's just really the title of it, observe and interact. And I'll just read a little bit of this and maybe just sort of paraphrase it. So really, the observe and interact from an ecosystem thinking perspective is the ability for humans to observe what's going on in the ecosystem and interact with it in such a way that they're not putting undue pressure or demands on any one part of the ecosystem, throwing it out of balance, right? Anything you would add?
I think that's the key point. It is not throwing it off. You observe, you find an appropriate way to interact, and you interact in a non-destructive way that doesn't destroy the ecosystem and allows it to maintain itself.
Right. The author of this further says, good design depends on a free and harmonious relationship between nature and people, in which careful observation and thoughtful interaction provide the design inspiration, repertoire, and patterns. So it's really a sort of a give and take. You're getting feedback from the ecosystem, the environment that you're changing, and you're still trying to maintain balance in that ecosystem. So how does this apply to a corporate culture, designing an ecosystem inside of an organization?
And this is where we get into the ecosystems thinking and the ecosystem principles from XSCALE.
I'm not going to attempt to read the ticker, but I'll just read it from the document. Again, we'll include links to these documents as part of the show notes. And so what it says is the first principle is directly responsible individuals. We're going to get to that in a minute. Business, design, and tech stakeholders make decisions together as peers to build solutions that fit each other's constraints. So we're going to attempt to break that down a little bit and how it relates to observe and interact from a permaculture perspective.
Right. So each of the different, just like in the natural world, in the permaculture world, I should say, there are players, there are components, and the ones that have been specifically called out here are business, design, and tech. But it could be any other stakeholders. The point is, you interact together as peers. So again, it's analogous to observe and interact. It's not one that dominates the other or one controls the other. Observe and interact. So that's a powerful notion. And working together as peers, building something to fit each other. Again, observe and interact. So this is a powerful concept.
What about the directly responsible individual part? How do you suppose that relates?
Just like in the natural world, the various components of an ecosystem do have a purpose. The tree holds the soil together. That's its purpose. Provides nutrients for things that live in the roots and so on. So it is in some loose sense responsible for something. So in the business world, it's a bit more specific. We do have business and tech people with specialized roles, and they are responsible for those roles, but they're in service of another and operating within the other's constraints. So again, works together in an ecosystem as opposed to a controlled or a directed model.
How is this different than how an organization might be organized, not following these principles, where things aren't in balance, where design, business, tech stakeholders each have their own sort of priorities that they have to answer to, and they're not in balance? What does that look like?
There was I almost considered sending you this picture, but there's a picture in a book I'm a big fan of, Reinventing Organizations, of a forest, and there was a picture of the tree and the bears and the little animals and the flowers, and the caption was, "Winter's come early this year. Just everybody hold, and we'll figure out what to do, and we'll tell you what to do." So that's of course that's a bit silly, but that's kind of the traditional model in some organizations where everybody's waiting for direction as to what to do in response to this unforeseen event. Whereas if it was an ecosystem, the tree would just do what trees do, and the mice would just do what mice do, because they know how to handle unexpected things. Within certain constraints. You can destroy an ecosystem if you truly try, but the ecosystem is generally very resilient, and therein is its power. And there's a lot of complexity when you look at it overall, but each of the individual pieces just goes about doing their thing.
Right.
And that's the beauty of it. They interact with the adjoining piece that they interact with. They don't know what that interacts with, but it all works, and it's simple.
Yeah. But in a way, in a business environment, the players, if you will, the directly responsible individuals do need to have some awareness of the overall goal of what it is that they're building, they're doing together, they're working on together, and the impact of the decisions that they make that may throw the ecosystem out of balance. So unlike in the natural systems where nature provides that sort of gatekeeper, in an organization, it really depends on leaders and doers to observe and interact the system that they're building and the system that they live in. So systems within systems, to be able to react, adapt, and observe, how their reactions are changing the balance or upsetting the balance of the system that they're in.
You bring up an important point. There is the mission. The mission of an ecosystem is to be sustainable and survive and provide a context for the various things that live within it. So too is the case with the organization, but it does have a purpose, and that purpose is to provide something of value to customers. So there is a clear mission, and you want to do more than just provide a service. You want to delight customers, at least to my way of thinking. But the two approaches have individuals that are responsible for various areas, but again, operating in a picture of delighting the customer in some way.
Yeah. And, a lot of times people may not know what the mission is for that organization.
That's a problem.
Or maybe the mission's been clouded by a profit motive. where, oh, we're here to make money, we're here to whatever. And so an organization that is aware of their ecosystem, internal, as well as the ecosystem that the organization lives in, the suppliers, the customers, the vendors, and all of that, is maybe more resilient than one in which you work where you don't really understand the purpose totally, fully. Would you say so?
Absolutely. There has been a school of thought that has said the purpose of an organization, of a business, is to deliver shareholder value. That is, I believe it's the Business Roundtable, has actually come out and said that that is actually very foolish. You do absolutely need to look at the full ecosystem. Of course, customers, stakeholders, shareholders are important, but so are staff, regulators, the community in which you operate. It is very foolish to only focus on shareholder value and short-term profit. Companies don't last very long when they do that, and customers tend to not like that.
Yeah. All right. So are we ready to go on to principle 2?
I think we are.
All right. So principle 2 from a permaculture perspective is, it's very simple: catch and store energy. So you might think, okay, what does this have to do with an organization? Catch and store energy. From a permaculture perspective, what would you say this means, or this signifies, this principle?
Energy is what, from a permaculture perspective, energy is what keeps the wheels turning. Keeps that doesn't hold very well in a permaculture model, where we're talking about sunlight and water and things of that sort. But you must have energy in order for the ecosystem to go and sustain itself. These
of course. The natural world, that would be the sun and all the energy that it provides, and provides life and sustenance for all of us beings on this planet.
Yeah, plants, animals which eat the plants, other animals which eat the other animals. But all again, it all works together.
Yeah, and we have limited time to catch, store that energy, and turn it into something else, convert that energy into some other form that is more usable. So how does that relate to an organization?
Well, if I could just add one more point, while being mindful of day and night, and also seasons, winter and summer. So it's complicated. The parallel in ecosystem thinking is, rather than energy, learning. We need to capture and store learning and share that learning with others. Just like in the natural world, the energy is shared, the energy from the sun. Here we're talking about learning. Learning is essential, but the critical point is to share that. And this actually is something that I think is unique in XSCALE, with the notion of learning flows and sharing learning. We've talked about that in an earlier episode. I don't think that other Agile practices emphasize this enough. Learning is essential. You need to break down the silos. You need to share the knowledge, and of course, in sharing, you improve. You pass on something, and then you get something back that's even better. And you won't know that until you share it. So this is absolutely essential.
I'm actually getting goosebumps thinking about the parallels between permaculture, catch and store energy, and the ecosystem thinking principle of capture and store learning in small self-organizing teams. It's really a beautiful, and one very few organizations, at least in my experience, do well, right? Or do consistently. That the learning that, people are capable of so much, right, in their career, in their jobs at work, and a lot of that is lost. A lot of that knowledge is lost because of the barriers, the constraints that are in place that prevent the flow of learning and knowledge between teams, between divisions, between departments, between whatever, between silos, and that energy is never to be recovered.
Yep. Right. I think a number of organizations are getting the practice around small teams. So big teams not so efficient, small teams much more. Cross-functional, self-organizing, that's very powerful. But where the power and the insight here is around sharing learning between the teams, and that sadly is not very common, at least in my experience.
What do you suppose it means? As part of the principle, Peter talks about capture and store learning in small self-organizing teams. As these work on the current bottleneck, they become capable of opening future ones.
This is the nature of the ecosystem. It responds unexpected developments because it's resilient. And if you are a small self-organizing team, you will be cross-functional, so you'll be able to work within your space and respond to the unexpected things that always come up without having to go and ask somebody for direction. So this is powerful. And this notion of learning and sharing the learning is a critical insight that.
Yeah, and it's closely tied to the first principle, right? So because you're observing, you're interacting, you're reacting, you're getting the feedback from the systems that you're working on as a small team, and you're sharing that knowledge, sharing that information. And so I think it's a very powerful combination so far.
I've heard this described as sense and respond as well.
Yeah, and the Cynefin model.
Yep.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some similarities between Cynefin and these principles. And of course, Cynefin is about the ability to sense and respond to changes, right, in a complicated or a complex environment. And these principles, I think, go a little deeper and a little broader than Cynefin, that sort of describe how humans ought to be organized and ought to share information in order to be more efficient. So, Glenn, we're at about 20 minutes. What say we stop here and we come back and discuss the next few principles in our next episode?
I think that's the plan.
All right. Excellent. Well, thanks for watching. Please leave your comments in the video and access the links. You can read all of them, so you're maybe a little bit more prepared as we talk about the next set of principles, however many we get through. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.